Imagine falling in love with someone you've never met in person. Someone you trust completely, whom you share your deepest thoughts and dreams with. Now, picture that very person turning out to be someone entirely different, a stranger in the worst possible way. Tonight, we explore the tragic story of a young American woman, Jessica, who traveled halfway across the world to meet the love of her life. But her story ended in a way no one could have ever predicted. A tragic turn of events that left one question lingering: what happened to Jessica, and who was behind the horror that ended her life? Jessica was a 22-year-old college student from America. Shy, introverted, and with a passion for photography, she had spent years cultivating an online presence, sharing her photographs and getting feedback from fellow enthusiasts. It was on a photography forum where she first encountered David, a man from South Africa who seemed perfect in every way. Charming, kind, and funny, he was everything Jessica was looking for: someone to escape her everyday life with, someone to explore the world with. Over the course of several months, they began a deep online relationship. David's messages grew more intimate. They shared secrets, laughed at each other's jokes, and even made future plans that involved meeting face-to-face for the first time in South Africa. She had always longed to visit South Africa, a country rich in natural beauty, culture, and adventure. And now, she was going to meet the man she thought she would spend the rest of her life with. But when she booked her flight, she couldn't have known that this decision would lead to her untimely and tragic death. 2 weeks after arriving in South Africa, Jessica's body was found in a remote, wooded area near Cape Town. It was a gruesome discovery that would forever change the lives of everyone who knew her. But the investigation that followed revealed shocking truths. What started as a heartwarming romance soon turned into a bloody nightmare that would unravel dark secrets hidden deep beneath the surface. The shocking question on everyone's lips: how could something like this happen? As the investigation unfolded, police learned that Jessica had been brutally murdered. The man she had traveled thousands of miles to meet, David, was the primary suspect. But there was more to this case than a simple crime of passion. The deeper investigators dug, the more questions they uncovered. Who was David really? What was his true motive? And why did Jessica, with all her dreams and aspirations, end up in such a horrific situation? Jessica's parents were devastated. They couldn't fathom how their daughter, who had been so full of life and excitement, could have been taken from them in such a violent way. The police were initially quick to focus their attention on David, but as they dug into his past, they realized something disturbing. This wasn't the first time David had been involved in suspicious circumstances. David's social media profiles were well curated, but it wasn't just the romantic messages that caught investigators' attention, it was the inconsistencies in his story. The more they learned about him, the more they realized that his identity, too, was a carefully constructed lie. His name wasn't David, and he wasn't even from South Africa. His entire persona had been fabricated. But why? Forensic evidence began to piece together the chilling events of that fateful day when Jessica arrived in South Africa. Despite David's claims of innocence, the physical evidence seemed to tell a different story. Jessica had been bound and strangled, her body dumped in an isolated area, a gruesome and deliberate act. But the most chilling clue came from a witness statement: someone had seen a man matching David's description fleeing the scene shortly after the murder. The investigation took a dramatic turn when police discovered a pattern of behavior. David, or rather the man pretending to be him, had done this before. In fact, he had used fake identities and online personas to lure women into dangerous situations in the past. Jessica had been an idealistic young woman, full of hopes and dreams. She had grown up in a small town in the Midwest, and she often found solace in her photography. It was through this passion that she had found a sense of belonging. But it was also through the internet that she had found David. It was supposed to be a fairy tale. Jessica was an only child. Her parents, though loving and supportive, often worried about her introverted nature. They were cautious when she told them about her online relationship with David, but Jessica insisted it was real. She showed them pictures of David. He was tall, handsome, and appeared to be well established. What could go wrong? Her parents, despite their reservations, supported her decision to meet him. After all, she was an adult, and she deserved to experience love and adventure. David, or whatever his real name was a master manipulator. He had been using the internet to deceive women for years, each time creating a new persona to fit the desires of the women he lured in. His charm, wit, and fake tenderness were his tools, and Jessica had fallen for them. But the real question was, who was this man? As investigators dug deeper into his background, they learned that David wasn't from South Africa at all. His true identity was tied to a small town in Eastern Europe, where he had been involved in several scams and fraudulent activities. His online presence was just one of his many con games, and Jessica was his latest target. As the case developed, more details about David's past came to light. It became clear that Jessica was not his first victim, and likely not his last. He had done this before. Created false identities, manipulated women, and ultimately, left them shattered. It was then that investigators discovered a woman from the United Kingdom who had a similar story. She too had met David online and had been convinced to travel to meet him. But before she could make the trip, she had grown suspicious of his intentions and had backed out. The police were now investigating whether David's motives were to exploit women financially, sexually, or something far darker. The case took on a new dimension as it became clear that David had been active on multiple dating platforms for years, luring women from all corners of the globe. His digital trail was a maze of fake names, false accounts, and criminal activity. But the trail was also a glimpse into his psyche. His pattern was one of calculated manipulation and sadistic pleasure. As more details emerged, the shocking truth began to surface. David was not simply a con artist. He was a predator. A man who had been stalking and targeting vulnerable women for years. The case was no longer just about Jessica, it was about uncovering a decades-long pattern of manipulation, betrayal, and terror. The true horror was not just in Jessica's murder but in the hundreds of women David had deceived, some of whom had tragically ended up in similar fates. The case of Jessica's death took its toll on her family and friends. Her parents, devastated by the loss, were forced to relive every moment of their daughter's life through the lens of her tragic end. They struggled to understand how their trusting daughter had ended up in the hands of a manipulator who had taken her from them. Her friends from college shared heartfelt messages, mourning the loss of the girl who had been so full of life. They couldn't fathom how the sweet, innocent woman they knew could have been so easily deceived. Jessica's body was discovered in a wooded area outside of Cape Town, South Africa. The scene was eerily quiet, only disturbed by the sounds of nature. The way she had been disposed of suggested that her killer wanted to ensure no one would find her. The body was hidden just far enough from any major roadways and deeply secluded within dense shrubbery. The forensics team immediately set to work. Blood stains on nearby rocks and trees indicated a violent struggle had occurred before Jessica was killed. It was clear from the evidence that her murderer had likely known her, or at least had made an effort to gain her trust. The extent of the violence told the investigators that this wasn't a random attack, it was calculated. The initial signs of trauma were significant, showing that Jessica had been struck multiple times with a blunt object before being suffocated. But the final cause of death wasn't immediately clear. There were no signs of sexual assault, but the brutality of the act pointed to something far more sinister. A few days later, a key witness came forward. A local resident who lived near the area where Jessica's body was found reported seeing a man matching David's description leaving the woods at night. The man had been acting strangely, appearing nervous and out of place. He was even seen wiping his hands on his pants as if to rid himself of something. When investigators checked David's social media, they found a photo of him wearing the same clothing that the witness had described. This sighting was crucial, it confirmed that David had been in the area the night Jessica was murdered. He was the last person seen near the scene. And yet, when questioned, David denied being anywhere near the woods that night. In fact, he denied knowing Jessica at all, despite the fact that they had spent months exchanging messages and phone calls. What was becoming clear was that David wasn't just some random criminal or opportunistic con artist. He was a master manipulator, someone who had spent years cultivating relationships with women across the globe. His charm, his lies, and his ability to weave a false identity made him a dangerous individual. In his own mind, David probably believed that his ability to manipulate women was an art form. Each woman he targeted was simply another subject in his twisted game. He used them for his own personal gratification and financial gain. He played with their emotions and used their vulnerabilities to make them trust him, only to discard them when they were no longer useful. Psychologists studying the case would later label David as a sociopath, someone with a complete lack of empathy, incapable of understanding the pain or consequences of their actions on others. To him, Jessica's life had been just another stepping stone in his web of lies. David's deception was no ordinary online scam. He didn't just create fake profiles for financial gain or to scam women out of money, he created relationships. He convinced women that they were loved, that they were special, that they were his one and only. This kind of deception is particularly dangerous, especially in the world of online dating. We live in an age where we can connect with people across the globe with the touch of a button, but how well do we really know the people on the other side of the screen? David's case is a stark reminder of how manipulative online catfishing can be, particularly when emotions and trust are involved. Women like Jessica trusted him, believed he was the person he portrayed himself to be. They shared intimate details of their lives, and in return, David gave them his attention, flattery, and promises of a future together. But behind the screen, there was a much darker reality. As the investigation continued, more women came forward. They described similar stories of meeting someone online, building a relationship, and planning to meet in person. But just like Jessica, they were left heartbroken, confused, and betrayed when David disappeared, often after convincing them to send money or gifts. Some of these women were lucky, they had managed to back out of the meeting before it was too late. Others, like Jessica, weren't so fortunate. Jessica's case had become a national sensation. As the media covered the story, it seemed as though every day brought new developments. News outlets from around the world were reporting on David's deception. And with each new revelation, the public became more and more outraged by what this man had done to women all over the world. David's arrest didn't come quickly. For months, he managed to evade the police by using a series of fake names and constantly changing his location. He'd even attempted to flee the country, but authorities had managed to track him down through an international network of law enforcement agencies. When David was finally captured in a small town in Eastern Europe, it was the culmination of an exhaustive search. The investigators knew that they had to act quickly. David was brought to trial on charges of murder, fraud, and multiple counts of deception. The trial was a media circus, with every detail of David's criminal activities coming to light. Women who had once been his victims now testified about the manipulation, the lies, and the emotional toll he had taken on them. His true identity was finally revealed to the public, and the shocking truth came out. David wasn't from South Africa, he wasn't even from the continent of Africa at all. He had been using fake documents and social media profiles to create the illusion of an exotic, charming man. The reality was much darker. As his trial progressed, the defense tried to argue that David was not responsible for his actions, that his upbringing had caused him to act out in these destructive ways. But the prosecution made it clear that David had been fully aware of what he was doing. He had orchestrated each of his lies with precision, preying on women's vulnerabilities for his own personal gain. The jury deliberated for hours before finding David guilty of first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His lies, his manipulation, his disregard for human life, all of it was laid bare in the courtroom. As the judge read out the sentence, David stood motionless. His fate was sealed. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While this was a small comfort to Jessica's grieving family, they knew that it wouldn't bring their daughter back. Jessica's parents were in the courtroom when David was sentenced. They could barely contain their tears. They had lost their only daughter to a man they never had the chance to meet, but whose lies and deception had cost them everything. Her mother, once so full of hope for Jessica's future, was now a shell of the woman she once was. As investigators continued to piece together David's past, it became apparent that his actions weren't random or impulsive, they were part of a long-established pattern. Understanding David's motivations became crucial in determining his psychological profile. Experts began to analyze his history, his childhood, and his personality, searching for clues that would explain why he had gone to such extreme lengths. David's need for control and dominance over women seemed to be the driving force behind his actions. It wasn't just about the money or the thrill of fooling people, it was about power. Power over their emotions, power over their lives, and ultimately, power over their deaths. His manipulation tactics were calculated, his use of charm and emotional vulnerability made him appear as the perfect partner, someone every woman would want to trust. And when they did, he had already laid out his trap. Psychiatrists who studied David noted that he displayed many signs of a psychopath, someone with an inability to empathize with others. This lack of empathy meant that David had no remorse or guilt for the pain he caused. His relationships were nothing more than a game to him, one where the stakes were high, and the rewards were control and validation. David's childhood was revealed to be troubling, but not unique in the way one might expect for a person who would go on to commit such heinous acts. Raised in a middle-class family, David's parents had separated when he was young. However, there were no signs of abuse or trauma that would immediately explain his behavior. It appeared that his path to manipulation and violence was shaped more by his personality traits and his views on relationships than by any external factors. As psychologists dug deeper, they found that David had a need to dominate and control his relationships, often seeking out vulnerable women who were easy to deceive. His lack of attachment to reality, his ability to lie without guilt, and his skill in gaining people's trust made him an ideal predator. But it wasn't just women who were victims in his world. The ultimate victim of his obsession with control was Jessica, who paid the ultimate price for his manipulation. David's narcissistic tendencies became a focal point of discussions about his psychology. He believed himself to be superior, someone deserving of admiration, and even worship. His manipulation was driven by a constant need for validation and admiration. His ability to deceive and fabricate a world where he was the center of attention was something that fed into his narcissism. The psychological profile that emerged painted a chilling portrait of David as someone who had never truly understood what it meant to care for others. He used women as tools to boost his own self-worth, and when they no longer served a purpose, he disposed of them either by disappearing or, in Jessica's case, by taking their lives. The case quickly became a media sensation. News outlets around the world ran headlines about the online killer, while social media users began to share Jessica's story and raise awareness about the dangers of online dating. As the investigation unfolded, the media relentlessly covered every new detail, creating a media frenzy. People from all walks of life were horrified by the story. Many women who had similar experiences reached out, sharing their own tales of online manipulation and emotional abuse. These stories were an eye-opener for the public, sparking debates about the safety of online interactions and the psychological toll they can have on people. Talk show hosts, bloggers, and social media influencers discussed the case in detail, dissecting David's motives and the broader implications of online relationships. The case raised important questions about privacy, safety, and how easily someone could slip through the cracks of the online dating world, even with the advances in technology and surveillance. The public's response was a mix of outrage and sadness. Many people expressed anger that a man like David had been able to deceive and ultimately murder an innocent woman. Social media users flooded the internet with hashtags like #JusticeForJessica, and petitions calling for stricter regulations on online dating platforms began circulating. People also began to question the online dating industry and its responsibility to protect users. Critics called for more robust background checks and accountability for users who used fake profiles or misrepresented themselves. Jessica's story ignited a movement to protect others from falling victim to similar crimes. In the wake of Jessica's murder, there was a significant shift in the way online dating platforms operated. Governments in various countries, including the US, Canada, and the UK, pushed for stricter regulations on online dating. These new laws aimed to ensure greater transparency and accountability for users, especially those who had created multiple fake profiles or engaged in fraudulent activities. The movement for safer online dating gained momentum. Tech companies and dating apps began to work more closely with law enforcement to track down online fraudsters and prevent new incidents like Jessica's from occurring.